other NOLA books. The first one and the second one. My kids, they love the books. We've recommended them to friends and family members and so on. Now, I need to know, Emil, Heather, where is NOLA going next?
Well, sorry, go ahead.
I've got to know. Come on.
You got to know. All right. So we are trying to capitalize a little bit on the suspense.
Mm-hmm.
So I don't think I can really give it away. But I will say that we're trying to do – we said this. There's a few reels I think we put up on our Instagram and Facebook accounts that kind of explain why did we go to Iceland. Why did Nola go to Iceland as her first trip with her family? And really, what do they say? Write what you know.
Yeah.
I think, right? So we know Iceland, or at least I for sure really know Iceland. And then I've brought my family there a few times, probably more times than we've been most other places. And so I would just say that think about what our family might know. Okay? So that's kind of, I guess, maybe the best I can do for you. But I will tell you there's a lot of – what's that?
New York City next?
Well, at some point, for sure, New York's got to be in the pipeline because we're both from Long Island, New York. My wife and I are both from Long Island. And you're on Long Island. You can't get to Long Island without going through New York City. If somebody's from one of the 5 boroughs and I bump into them, I don't know they're from the 5 boroughs. They say, where are you from? I say, New York. Or they say, oh, really, where? And I say, oh, Long Island. They go, Long Island, right? But to everybody else, they all pretty much know that Long Island is basically an extension of New York City. You can't get there without going through it, period.
Right.
If you take a plane, you land at LaGuardia, you land at JFK, you're in Queens. That's one of the 5 boroughs. You drive through or you take a train or a bus, you're driving through. There's no bridges to get to Long Island. So, and most of the people have at some point worked or lived in New York City or both, and then they kind of move out to the island. So it's definitely, there's a strong connection there. And where do you go when you want to do crazy, cool, exciting stuff? How do you not go to New York City if you live, a 45-minute train ride away? So
Right.
So that's on there. But we've actually had some people request Australia, which we don't know a lot about. I haven't been to Australia, so we'd have to do some research there. You had a suggestion also, Hong Kong.
Hong Kong, check it out.
So we got to add that to the mix. Texas, and in some, so a few Texas recommendations or requests. One in particular, Houston, like very specifically Houston, not just Texas. I mean, Texas is pretty big. So D.C., we lived in and around the D.C. area. I was actually just in D.C. not that long ago. That's in the pipeline. Actually, Asia, Hong Kong was not – you mentioned Hong Kong, but there are a few other places that people have requested. So Japan, South Korea. I don't know about China specifically, but several places in Asia. Somebody actually said, I'd like to see Nola go to the White House. It's like, oh, okay.
Nice.
We got to figure out how to do that without upsetting half the country, right? So, because one way or the other, if we do it too quick, everybody's upset about the current one, and then you do it too late, and you got to block out the face of whoever's the president.
Right.
So just exploring the White House. But, yeah, so that's kind of what we're thinking about. So I would just say if you just think about what we would know, the places that we would know the best, that'll give you a pretty strong, a good guess about where we're going. And then follow along because that's what we need. We're going to try and go into TikTok now. Are you on TikTok?
I'm not.
Yeah. So
Maybe
I had no desire to do. I had no desire to be on social media at all.
Right.
But then 2020 happened, and we kind of we're forced onto social media to a degree, especially as pastors. And it just, the more I'm on it, the more sometimes I just despise it so much.
Right.
But it's an important tool. And TikTok seems to be a place that the algorithms maybe work better. There's better audience generation, better ways to capture people's attention. And so we're going to try it because Facebook is not the best when it comes to this kind of stuff. Instagram is better, but still not great for us. And I think also that we probably need a few more books to really get things cranking. 3 or 4 different locations before it really takes a hold and gets things going. So,
right. Great. Well, I can't wait. For the next one.
Yeah, and I'm
Fourth.
Always glad to hear that kids love the books, because I think people look at an independently published book and they go, oh, well, this has got to be crap. This can't be good. I think obviously I'm biased, but I really do think it's pretty good. Could it be better? Of course. But I think it's pretty good quality. We, put our heart and soul into it. And I think if people just give it a try, they're going to see that it's worth it. It's worth a lot more than the $11.99, $12.99, whatever it is they're going to put into it. So,
yeah.
But you've got a second book coming too.
I do. Yeah. It's sort of like a second part to Curious Cases. And I wrote it over the course of about 13 months. I just finished the rough draft. 20 chapters, 4 case studies a chapter, so 80 stories. And I think if you like Curious Cases, you'll love the next book.
So you said that to me before we got started. Why specifically do you think if you liked it, you'll love it?
I think the topics are maybe in some ways even more timeless in the second book, and there's even more detail. I'll just kind of leave it at that.
Okay.
Well, I'll say one thing. There is a chapter on artificial intelligence, and I think that will be very interesting to people.
Yeah.
What does it mean to be human, so on and so forth? And how does the church engage artificial intelligence? Because right now we're just getting a little tiny taste of what it's going to be.
Oh, yeah. There's a few guys that I listen to every now and then, totally non-theological, kind of business-oriented. And they think, we're just in the first inning of a 9-inning game. We're in it's 10 o'clock at the AI party that's going to go until 4 a.m. So it's really just the beginning. Do you, not to get too distracted with AI, but do you think that humans are, so I think that, we have obviously all these fears about AI. You've got Terminator, you've got The Matrix, you've got how many other movies and stories that have sort of, taken this idea and run with it to instill fear and trepidation in all of us who are actually going to maybe live through this. But I've always kind of, do you think that humans are actually capable of creating life the way that God created life? We're made in the image of God, but do you think that that is a real fear that something would take over? Or is that humans thinking a little bit too highly of our capabilities?
It's a real fear, Emil. I almost don't even want to get into it because I write so much about it in the book.
Okay.
And I think even people that think, well, no, how do I put this? Elements with artificial intelligence through stem cell research and things like that, and through cloning, will really make you question what's the origin of this person?
Huh.
Is this person a twin? Or
like
are
an
they
actual,
more machine?
yeah.
So, and when I talk about these things, what I write about, you think, oh, well, that's 100 years away.
No.
In some cases, possibly, but some of it is just, from what I understand, and I'm not a scientist, this is just me listening to lectures and reading and things and scientific journals or what have you. And this is what I imagine it to be. I'm not stating this as scientific fact, but this is what I understand it to be. And I'll just kind of leave it at that. In the church, basically what we were told at seminary, for instance, or what we heard from professors that were engaging with scientists, the big question of this century will be, what does it mean to be human? And there will be all of these things that we can do in theory, but then the question will come up, should we do this?
Yeah.
And quite possibly the church will have an opportunity to speak into that and say, should we do this? We can technically do this. So, yeah, I think you'll really like the second book. I think a lot of people that found Curious Cases entertaining or helpful will quite possibly love the second book.
Yeah. I mean, I already want to have a conversation with you about AI, but that's not what we signed up for here this morning. But you made me think. There's a quote from C.S. Lewis, and maybe you have it off the top of your head, that if not, it might be something helpful as you consider all the things you were just talking about. But he says something like, politics is the art or science, or I'm paraphrasing, I don't know. But politics is basically about what you can do, and
Sure.
Religion is essentially what you should do. So something along those lines, and I forget all the context there, but
right. Well, religion is reconciliation, where politics or the government, I mean, it's more so there to hold things in place, keep chaos from springing up. Yes, make positive changes, which that's a whole debate. You have some people that think, government's bad, or I don't know. And then you have other people that think, no, the government can do great good. So, yeah, but the church, the gospel makes no demands. The gospel gives promises in Jesus Christ that points us to Jesus, his death and his resurrection, where it's tough for the church to say, do this or else. There's not much to say. It's just receive life in Jesus Christ. He loves you. He's died for you. He's risen again. Where the government, they can say, do this or else.
Yeah. Yeah. Their government is definitely about power, and the church of Jesus Christ, at least, is about giving up power. And I think that's what makes being a Christian in America so complicated, is because on the one hand, we have this role in what is done with power. And then on the other hand, our personal faith tells us to completely give up power. And then yet we have our vocations, where God puts us in places where we are called to exercise authority and power. And how do we do that in a good, godly way? We were just talking about that, actually, about some of the past connections and situations we've been involved in, right? Like this idea that, you know what, sometimes maybe we need to exercise that authority a little bit more boldly. I don't think Jesus was a little mousy little, maybe I will, maybe I won't. No, I mean, he was pretty tough, but he was also Jesus. So
sure.
Anyway, yes. So we've got a couple of case studies that you mentioned.
Yeah.
And I think actually some of these ideas are going to maybe come out here. Adding a lay leader. This is on conflict resolution. It's page 34 in your book, Curious Cases. It's a pretty short one. Can I just read it, or do you want to read it, or?
Feel free, Emil. Please read. Yeah, absolutely.
All right. Adding a lay leader, ? Okay, that's what we're dealing with here. Bug Tatum. Where do you get these names from? Bug Tatum has recently joined his 5th church in 8 years. Red flag. He and his second wife, Shanita, are excited for a new start. With great pride, Bug makes a point to inform his new pastor that at several past congregations he has served as a lay leader and is willing to serve as one in the future as well. About a month after Bug and Shanita become members, Pastor Daniel notices that Bug is speaking with great authority on church policy issues, almost as if he is the chairman of the congregation or a pastor on staff. What is more interesting to Pastor Daniel is certain members in the congregation seem to be under the impression that Bug is a licensed psychologist. Oh, man, you couldn't make this stuff up. However, Bug has told Pastor Daniel and others publicly that he barely graduated from high school and despises institutions of higher learning and authority in general. One morning after returning from a much-needed 2-week vacation, Pastor Daniel sees Andy Willie, the church treasurer and an elder, walking out of the office. Pastor Daniel inquires how the services went with retired pastor Louis Sparkman filling in. Andy responds, "Well, it's a funny thing. Louis is getting older, and he was unable to fill in for you, so he had to cancel 2 Sundays in a row. Thankfully, Bug Tatum was able to fill in and lead the service 2 weeks in a row, and he did a great job. In fact, I and the other elders feel that Bug should be made a lay leader, and he can kind of serve as your right-hand man, sort of like an assistant pastor. That way, when you get sick, you won't have to go to all of the trouble of finding someone to fill in for you." Although Pastor Daniel is nearly speechless, he thanks Andy for letting him know how the services went before heading to his study. Later that day, Pastor Daniel phones Pastor Louis and learns that a man identifying himself as a church elder phoned Louis the night before each service and told him there was no longer need for a substitute pastor to show up because everything was being handled by the lay leader. Louis remembers that the man introduced himself as Bug. Wow.
Yeah.
You know, people think this stuff doesn't happen in churches.
Sure.
But it does. It totally does.
Yeah. Pretty much all of the issues happening in our society to some degree are happening inside the church, in the lives of the church, you could say, or in the walls of a church building, or outside of those walls.
Yep. Pastors are people too. Parishioners are people too.
Sure.
And, I'm kind of wrestling with this idea. Second Sunday in Advent, year C, are you looking at that for this coming Sunday?
A little bit.
Okay. So Philippians 1, he who began a good work in you will bring it to completion at the day of Jesus Christ.
Sure.
You got Malachi just ripping people a new one. You got John the Baptist fulfilling, at least in part, Malachi and ripping people a new one. You brood of vipers.
Right.
In fact, in Luke, it's interesting. He's not targeting the scribes and Pharisees who come out as it is in other of the Gospels, right? Luke, it just says, when people came out, he said, you brood of vipers, right? So he's just saying everybody. And then I'm listening to this song, this Christian song on a Christian radio station. I couldn't tell you the name of the song, but, it's something like, I'm the child of a king. When he looks at me, he wouldn't change a thing. And I go, I think I understand the intent, but that's a dangerous message.
Right.
Because we suck. We suck so bad. And I'm looking at this story and I'm going, okay, so Bug is obviously a train wreck. I'm pretty sure God would change a lot of things about Bug. Right? Even if he is baptized, even if he confesses faith in Jesus Christ, even if, right? I mean, he wants to change an awful lot about Bug. And then you got Andy Willie and you got the elders and it's like, yeah, he wants you to stop being stupid. Like, what Are you kidding?
Sure.
Are you that naive? And I
Right.
think church people, and this is actually a common criticism, I think, of people outside the church. Christians are just too naive.
Yeah. Sure.
So
Sure.
what,
Well,
I mean, you can't maybe say exactly, but you lived through something like this, or you know people that went through at least
sure.
pieces of this, right? And so,
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, really, what this book is about, in a way, Emil, is healthy boundaries. It's really about healthy boundaries. If someone who was not from a faith background read this, I think they would get something out of it if they were looking at it through the lens of establishing good boundaries, dealing with conflict. We all deal with conflict. Every institution, every family, every church has some degree of dysfunction or conflict in it because there's sin in every person's life to some degree or another. So it's really, in a way, about conflict resolution, healthy boundaries, yes, about dealing with messy situations and relating Jesus into those messy situations. But I actually believe, as crazy as it sounds, someone who's very secular could read this and say, yeah, I dealt with a mess like that once, except it wasn't at a church. It was when I was doing retail,
yeah,
right after I graduated from high school or from college. Or, yeah, that sounds a little bit like when my grandma passed away and my second cousin showed up that claimed to be very close with her, but no one ever saw it. These are real life situations. And if we say, well, we have the same problems as people without faith, well, then people without faith would probably have some of the same problems that people with faith have.
yeah,
Uh, you know, trying to gently explain things, talk with someone instead of to someone or at someone, showing patience, but also being willing to kind of stand up and say, hey, I can't go that far. I owned what I can own, but I can't own that. That's not accurate or fair. And then in some cases, the question is, should the pastor even be involved in this?
yeah.
Should they even be dealing with this? Is this even who should be involved with this exactly? Yeah.
Yeah, it's so hard. Well, I mean, because if you're the pastor, you're the one that's going to have to deal with this crazy guy, right? I mean, so in a sense,
Yeah.
the pastor is involved no matter what, in this particular
Sure.
situation, right?
Sure.
But yeah, everyone else is the one allowing this kind of thing to happen, and they're not being very wise about it. Like, hey, this
Right.
guy's been to 5 churches in 8 years. That's a red flag, big red flag. And then,
Sure.
this retired guy, I mean, he should know better. Like the night before the lay leader's going to do it.
Right.
Are you naive? Like how long you've been in ministry? 30, 40, 50 years? You show up because you know something fishy's going on, right?
Right.
And maybe he's retired and he doesn't want to deal with that, and that's fair, I guess, too. But
Sure.
I'd show up and just say, "Oh yeah, some weird guy. I've never met him before, and I'm a pastor, and I was told by Pastor so and so, so I'm here." And you could even just say, "I'm just here to collect my check, if nothing else, because I already wrote the sermon. I already did this, right?" And that's kind of what we were talking about, like this authority idea. People tend to be a little bit hesitant, reticent to like push at all, right? So I think church people in particular. But what that does is it gives people that are willing to throw their weight around like crazy, it gives them way too much control, right?
Sure.
So if you have healthy boundaries, you are going to stop other people that have unhealthy boundaries. That's what a healthy boundary is. I think, right? I mean, would you say that is fair, or am I just
your own person and your own family? I would say, yeah, I would say for your own person, your own family. I'm reminded of a Dale Meyer quote. He said this in homiletics to us: God thunders, but that doesn't mean you need to thunder.
Mm.
And I think about that with the readings coming up. God thunders, but that doesn't mean you need to. I mean, other than a few instances, I would say, like, hey, you know, someone's hurting a kid or something like that. You know, there is probably a time to thunder and to call the police. But typically, you know, you're there to point them to Christ, point them to his sacraments, teach the whole counsel of God. And there are just a lot of things where it's like, I can give you my opinion on the whole social media thing, what we're doing with our church. I can throw out some ideas. I'm happy to walk alongside of you, but I don't want to be I feel like it's not necessarily the best use of my time to be the social media guru. You know, I preach God's word to you richly, solidly, week in, week out, teach really great Bible studies, to love you, to be there with you when you're in the hospital or at a family reunion or whatever it might be. And that's such an honor and a privilege, but I don't necessarily want to be the social media guru. I can give you opinions on, you know, the property. If you'd like that, I can make a suggestion. Like, it'd be nice to have a bench here that could help facilitate fellowship, you know.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah.
Like, whatever it might be, but I don't really want to be the head of property. And as a pastor, sometimes you get pulled in those directions. Not that I'm getting pulled in those directions where I'm at all, but I hear that a lot. And, you know, from other pastors, and sometimes, you know, you have somebody that people are really drawn to with their heart, like a lay leader. They knew this person. Their parents were on some sort of committee or did Kiwanis together, and they have some sort of close relationship through that. An uncle owned a deli or something, and, you know, and people, so their heart is very much drawn to that person. And it's so hard for them sometimes to think logically about what is taking place, to take a couple steps back and just say, this doesn't quite seem right. This doesn't quite seem fair, because there's such a difference, Emil. I guess this is what I'd say also. There's such a difference sometimes, and not in every case, but in a lot of cases, between saying, hey, we love you, welcome to our church, come to the potluck, you want help with VBS, that's great. There's a difference between that sometimes and saying, like, we want you to be chairperson of the congregation.
Yeah.
We want you to be head of properties for the church and for the school, this giant campus. Those are two different things. You should have pretty strong standards for leaders, and establishing healthy boundaries with leaders, sometimes that can be really a challenge. And again, I'm not facing that, thankfully, right now. And I hope you're not either. But yeah, it's not the easiest thing to establish healthy boundaries, especially when people are maybe drawn to a particular person with their heart. They maybe feel bad for that person. They know that person's story, and maybe there's good reason to feel bad for them.
Yeah.
But they can't logically see what's going on. They're too close to the situation.
Yeah. This is why judges and, you know, they recuse themselves in certain cases, or there's a lot of that kind of stuff, not just judges, but, you know, when you're too close to a situation in government, right? Like
Sure.
I was working with the coroner's office. They had a chaplaincy program, volunteer chaplaincy program, and you have to go through every year. You'd have to go through this Louisiana ethics training, And as part of that ethics training, like there's this list, very specific things, like things you can do and things you can't do, things you can accept and things you can't accept, things you, right? You can't you got to maintain boundaries. You can't let people create those emotional bonds that make it unfair and unhealthy. Right. So that idea, you know, God thunders, but it doesn't mean you have to. I think there's a lot of value there. And in that story where you were talking about like a child being abused or something, you said something like maybe you need to thunder a little. I would say actually no. What you described is actually allowing God to thunder through government, through the authority established through the courts, the police, and all that kind of stuff, by reporting what needs to be reported when you are, right? God is thundering to you through the government that you are a mandatory reporter, you have to do this, and you do it. And then God thunders through the mechanisms that are in place for that. And then you do the caring and pastoral care for the people involved, right?
Right.
I think exactly. I think that's a lot healthier, and it's good when the congregation does that from a, you know, you're kind of talking about the organizational aspects of a congregation. God may thunder through the leaders that have been put in place for the running of the organization. Yeah. But that doesn't mean he has to thunder through the pastor. And that's, I didn't think of it this way exactly, but I've tried to explain to people, like, listen, when the pastor gets up and is the one who has to keep saying, oh, by the way, guys, this whole thing's about to fall apart if y'all don't do something.
Sure.
You know, people don't hear it the same way. It's not as effective. And frankly, it's not my role. It's more likely to disrupt the pastoral relationship that I need to have with the congregation. Right. So if God's going to thunder through anybody, he's better off thundering through chairman of the congregation, the head elder, all that kind of stuff, district president and whatnot. So,
right.
God thunders.
It's their congregation, yeah.
And that's James and John, right? The sons of thunder. Do you want us to call down fire from heaven? And he's like, you idiots. You don't get it. You still don't get it, right? So how would you handle this? Assuming we take the approach that you're recommending, or at least suggesting that, well, does the pastor need to be involved at all? Right? What would that look like? A pastor basically saying, you know what, I'm here to provide scriptural teaching and preaching and provide Christ to people, to be Jesus in these various situations. It's not my job to say yes or no or whatever. How do you maintain that sort of like separation, if that makes sense? You know, that sort of boundary where I'm the pastor, I'm not the CEO.
Right. Well, there would be a lot to break down in this particular situation. If you just kind of looked at it real quick, you'd say, well, you know, just tell them to get lost or something. I don't know what someone would say exactly if they just looked at it really quickly. But if he did, in fact, call the other pastor and, you know, say, oh, you don't need to fill in. I mean, that's an Eighth Commandment issue. So there's some false witness there. So you'd want to talk with him about it. Mainly, I would just listen. I would just try to hear what he's saying. Did this actually happen? I would listen and listen and listen. Let him tell me what took place. And then I guess in the kindest way possible, as much as possible, with the elders hopefully supporting you, I would say, hey, for the sake of good order and consistency, there's a pastor at this congregation. In emergency cases, people can baptize who aren't pastors, so on and so forth. But for the sake of good order and consistency, this congregation has a pastor. This person I'm the pastor here. This person was slotted to fill in those Sundays? Let's talk about that. Did you call them and say this, that there's no need to show up, so on? And then maybe I would even explore with Bug, would you like to become a pastor? Is that something you're interested in doing? Would you like to go to school to become a pastor? Not to say you can't lead Bible studies or there aren't a lot of things you can do, but usually there's some degree of education attached to that position or to that office. And you have not been called here. It's kind of a difficult thing from a New Testament perspective, because sometimes in the New Testament, a congregation would call a pastor, much like we do. But in other cases, Paul would just say, hey, Timothy, go serve as their pastor. And you'd be put into that office. Right now, let's just say even in the Lutheran Church, you have people that are serving as directors of Christian education, directors of Christian ministry, doing some sort of lay leadership position and serving. And they're, hey, well, do you want to preach this week? And, or a vicar or whomever. And they're actually sort of being put into that office by the pastor. So it's a little bit of a messy thing, because maybe Bug Tatum was put into that position. So I really what it is it would be a lot of listening to start off with to try to diagnose what exactly is going on here.
Well, personally, there's enough red flags here that I wouldn't even begin to suggest that this man should go and terrorize some congregation, some poor unsuspecting congregation. But maybe that's just me. Maybe I've just been, I'm too cynical now.
No, yeah, the more you dive into it, because
I mean,
to be a psychologist, possibly.
Yeah, exactly. He's thrown his weight around way too much for a new person.
Right.
It speaks to some underlying psychological dysfunction, narcissism, major narcissism going on. And it's just mind-blowing how easily narcissists take control of churches. It's unbelievable. And we were talking a little bit about this before we started the podcast here, but just the way most pastors, even most church people, they're just not willing to say anything. They think that it's more godly to be quiet and sort of keep the peace than it is to speak truth. And the truth, Jesus says, I am the way, the truth, and the life, right? I'm not the niceness, and yes, he's the Prince of Peace. I came to bring peace, right? But, I didn't come to bring peace, but a sword. He says both of those things. So, anyway, speak to that. Like, what's your experience? Why do you think people just walk away rather than fight the fight?
It's fight or flight. Yeah, it's fight or flight, sort of. And then also, if you look at polling, and I'm not going to give an exact number, I can give approximate numbers. It's been a year or two since I've seen this, but it was something like in 1993. Oh my goodness, I can't remember the exact number. It was in the low 90s, I want to say 90% or something close to that, where Christians, when asked, do you have a personal responsibility to share your faith? Which you would think that would be speaking the truth in difficult situations. You would think, where now it's something like under 50% would say that when asked. Well, no, that's the pastor's job, or that's, an elder's job, maybe. And quite frankly, people need leadership to direct them to understand, hey, you can be a leader also. You're a royal priest. You can go to Bible study also. You could lead a Bible study. You could lead a mission trip. You have talents and gifts from the Lord also. You don't have to agree with everything the pastor says. When I teach a Bible study, I share everything that I learned in seminary or doing mission work. I don't keep anything back from people. I really don't. And sometimes that's maybe a little bit risky. I don't know. But not everyone, I think, does that. That's sort of scary to some people. But I just try to relate it to people. And I guess really, if people felt more of a responsibility to share their faith, they would be speaking truth in some of these difficult situations, I would imagine.
So, yeah, I think there's definitely a connection there.
Yeah.
What about our, what would you say about this? I think there's generally a trend in our culture. People just are less and less tolerant of discomfort.
Right.
They don't generally like being uncomfortable. And whatever happens here in this case study or 1,000 other situations in church, in work, family, it's going to be an uncomfortable conversation. So how do you think does that play into this at all? And why?
We have a very like kind of puritanical culture in our country in general, I think. So, and kind of a sensitive culture, I think in some ways. We're very idealistic in the United States, even people that are secular.
Yeah.
And I think, for instance, a lot of times with Brits, I think they can kind of have a real they can have a bit of a row with people, whether at work or whatever they're doing, family life, work, kind of tell it how it is. And I've seen this, but then they'll be, they'll have a beer with them or a coffee like 30 minutes later, like it never happened. Like we settled it. Where I feel like in our culture, there's something going on. Maybe it's not related to puritanicalism.
Well, but I think there is something to that. When you said it at first, I was kind of like, oh, is it? And no, yeah, this purity idea, this perfecting of ourselves and our culture, right? I mean, it's this, it's idealism. It's pursuing the ideal. And I don't think there's anything wrong with that as long as we recognize what Paul is saying in our epistle reading this Sunday, right? I know that God who began a good work in you will bring it to completion when? At the day of Jesus Christ. And who's going to bring it to completion? Not you. It's Christ in you. Pursue it, but leave it in the hands of Jesus, the one who's going to bring it to completion on the last day.
Well, I'll just say this. I mean, I know of a famous seminary, let me just put it that way, where one of the professors was trying to teach that it's a sin to get angry, to get angry about anything. It's a sin. And in my opinion, this gentleman, well, from what I heard, ironically, pretty much when he presented this to the faculty, everyone got angry. They all got angry. And I've known people like this that gravitate to that kind of thinking. And it's like, no, it's not a sin to be tired. It's not a sin to cry. It's not a sin to get sick. It's not a sin to get angry. I mean, I'm trying to think how he got around the verses on be angry and do not sin. He was trying to say that was purely Christological. Oh, it was no disrespect to our Mennonite brothers and sisters. It was more like that, though. A lot of his teaching, I think, is actually more like that. Almost sort of the physical world is bad. Everything's evil. There's a lot of this. So anyway, there are just a lot of Christians, I think, that do sort of have that thinking in this country.
That anger is bad.
Yeah, any sort of anger is bad. There's confrontation, there's going to be anger. So let's just kind of put our heads in the sand. Yeah, there are a fair amount of people like that. Yeah. They just can't have difficult conversations like, hey, you know, both of your congregations have the same exact property. It was built 50 years ago. Why not sell that property and worship on one property? And then, you could hire a secretary.
Yeah.
You could get like a projector screen in here so people can actually see the on
a
the
projector screen.
You could have an ADA accessible bathroom.
Yeah.
Wouldn't that be nice? Whatever it might be. And yeah, it's not a sin to be angry. It's not a sin, with it, if it's being angry for the right reasons. And people who say that tend to be very passive aggressive people. I noticed super passive aggressive.
They may not scream at you, but they're doing everything they can to mess with you and screw up your life. Yeah, and they do it with a smile. But just because they do it with a smile doesn't mean they're like trying to kill you. You know what I'm saying? If anything, it just makes them sociopaths. Right? Like they're enjoying this a little bit too much.
Emil, boy, are you hitting the nail on the head, man?
Yeah. And, so I come from a very expressive family.
Sure.
Not just because we're from New York. I mean, my grandparents, on my mom's side at least, are from the Bronx. I mean,
sure,
for real. I mean, that's for real New York. You know what I'm saying?
Right.
And they were for real. They, what they say these days, a little bit extra. You know what I'm saying? I mean, they were extra. And so just family gatherings, I mean, the energy and, I mean, in every sense, like laughter and joy, but also like anger and frustration and all this, like it just pours out, right? And then New York tends to be a little bit more like that because if you're just entirely passive all the time, people will step on you. I mean, they literally step on you. There's like 10 million people in New York at any given time, right? You're all
cool and live in a place like New York or Hong Kong or Philly.
You gotta be somewhat assertive, right? So I have that, but then ever since I've been to seminary and been in ministry now, like there is this, I have felt this, like I think there are a lot of times where I don't say things. And maybe it's good because I'm a little bit extra, because I'm a little too much for some people.
Yeah.
But at the same time, I'm like, maybe that's what it is, what you're saying. Like, I've been conditioned to believe that any kind of anger is bad. But it's funny. I actually taught on this not that long ago. Be angry, but in your anger, do not sin, right? What is it that
clear cut to me? Yeah.
Yeah. So what is it that makes people angry?
Yeah.
The opposite of love. I'm not getting this right here. You get angry because of what you love.
Sure.
So if somebody comes in to your house and does something to your wife or your kids, you're going to be angry, and you should be. Why? Because you love your wife and your kids, right?
Well, you're just a human being. And that gets into a whole nother thing, Emil, of we have, I think, church bodies. I think there are a lot of, now I'm using this theological talk here, that I think subscribe to docetism. So you have two heresies, Arianism, which denies Jesus being fully God and only being a human being or an angel or something like that, which is a heresy. Jesus is fully God and fully man. One person, two inseparable natures. That's the hypostatic union. But I think even in the Lutheran Church, a lot of evangelicals, just kind of a lot of Christians, I think, do have a lean towards docetism, really struggling with Jesus being fully human. They don't have a problem with the fully divine part, But
yeah, so when Jesus gets angry or Jesus gets hungry or Jesus, right? I mean, they have problems with those passages.
yeah, or born not knowing he's God.
Mm.
That's what the church has traditionally taught, believed, and confessed. That's what the church has always believed, taught, and confessed traditionally. At some point, he realized he was God. I mean, I'll get into a little bit of the whole thing with not holding anything back from people during Bible study. I'll just say it. Probably some of the listeners aren't going to like this. I don't know. And they don't have to agree. But there's a guy named Franz Pieper, Franz Pieper, Lutheran systematician, scholar from about 100 years ago. Okay, kind of a famous guy. He taught that Jesus was typically in a state of humiliation and not a state of exaltation. Okay, so in other words, Jesus wasn't just like constantly using his divine power. He wasn't just like sitting on the edge of a village and people are just all day just bringing thousands upon thousands of people to like be healed by him. And he's just, every person he's looking at, he's just reading their thoughts. He was typically in a state of humiliation, not using his divine powers. That's what Francis Pieper taught, an LCMS, Lutheran Church Missouri Synod systematician. So if you even somewhat believe that or somewhat take that seriously, logically speaking, if we got in a time machine and went back 2,000 years to Palestine and walked up to this itinerant rabbi, Jesus of Nazareth, who is the Christ, who is the Messiah, who is the Son of the living God, but is in a state of humiliation usually, and we start speaking 21st century English to him, he's going to be like, I don't know who you are. I don't know what this is. In Aramaic, he's going to say that, or Greek. If you take what Franz Pieper said seriously. Now, I'll lay that out to people during Bible study and just, hey, this might, upset some of you. You don't have to agree with it. You don't have to agree with what Pieper's saying here or the conclusion that I come to based on what he says. But if you do, that's great. You don't have to agree with everything I say. And, quite frankly, I think a lot of Christians like to think of the Lord as being this person who's not fully human, only sort of human. He's human, but he didn't go through puberty. He's human, but there was never a girl. There was never a woman that was attracted to him.
Wow.
He never got angry when he smashed his thumb with a hammer.
Or he never smashed his thumb.
Yeah, right. When he was learning to read and write, he never made a mistake. He never had a dirty diaper. And they'd like to think of the Lord as being this person on a cloud, a fluffy cloud, with an angel that's playing a harp. There's drippy Victorian piano music. He's just,
yeah.
He wasn't hanging around construction workers and fishermen that swore, or some of which might have been, doing some pretty crazy stuff. He never spent time with them.
Yeah.
Sorry. I mean, and quite frankly, Emil, I'm just going to say this. I mean, being out in Wisconsin, and I love the people of Wisconsin, God bless them. But being out there and being back in Cleveland, it really struck me. It continues to strike me like, wow, Cleveland would have a lot more in common with like Baltimore or Philly than it would with like, and I love the people of Nebraska or Kansas or rural Wisconsin, than it probably would with like a rural area of like Kansas or something like that. And we love them, but cultures are different. And I guess I bring that up, trying to bring this full circle, talking about the anger thing. Boy, I can think of a couple seminaries where I think every single one of their teachers is from a rural area of the Midwest, like the real Midwest. And just there's never anyone qualified from the East Coast, I guess, or from an actual like bigger city. There's not a single. It's only people that live in a rural area that's 25 years behind the times, and just everything was just, very straight laced and never had a single conflict when they were in ministry. And, gee golly ducks, and we never even talked about that when I was growing up. I was just totally blown away by that.
Yeah.
And we wonder why things, it's not that people don't want to hear about Jesus. I think a lot of people want to hear about Jesus. I think it's kind of a thing where, are we preparing people to tell, an immigrant community in the short north about Jesus? Are we preparing people to talk about Jesus in Homeland, Maryland? Or are we just, I don't want to say just, preparing people to talk about Jesus in a rural area, which I love rural areas. Again, I love rural areas. It's nothing against that. But when you have as more churches in Manhattan, Kansas than you do in Manhattan, New York, maybe that for your denomination, maybe that's a bit of an issue. When someone asks you what's going on, like, why aren't we doing more outreach? It's totally fair to bring up that our society is becoming more secular, but when that's all you can point to and you don't take any responsibility yourself, or when people ask you about accountability or metrics, oh, we can't do that. Just let the Holy Spirit be. No, that's not taking responsibility. That's not leadership.
It's not leadership. It's not. It's not repentance either. And isn't that the entirety of the Christian life?
Sure.
Is all about repentance. I mean, that's Luther. It's the 95 Theses, I think, right? So absolutely. This is what I was telling you before about that song that's been driving me nuts since I heard it. And it's not the first time. But this idea that, I'm the child of a king. When he looks at me, he wouldn't change a thing.
Mm-hmm.
No, there's a lot he'd change, and he's trying to if you would just get out of the way. And you'll be a lot better off, and you'll enjoy life, and you'll have a deeper appreciation for him and his love, not because he accepts you exactly the way you are, and not only accepts you, but affirms you in it, but when you realize that he has known the whole time that you are like this close to blowing up your entire life every minute of every day because you think you got it all together. And he just this is Psalm 139, the end of Psalm 39, right? Search me and know me and find any wicked way in me, right? That's the scriptural, right? It's like, God, I know that there's more for me. I know you have more for me. I know that I'm in a broken world. I'm in a broken human frame. Help me, right? We don't have that. And I think if people saw that in us, there's
a bit of a Pharisaical spirit.
A bit. It's enormous.
But we have all the answers. Let us come into, yes, our church is in this community. And I'm not talking about your church or my church again. I'm speaking sort of broadly and generally. We have so many congregations. I'm not just talking about the Lutheran Church. I'm not even talking about the Lutheran Church necessarily.
I would actually say specifically about Open Arms, one of the things that I was attracted to about Open Arms was, first off, this idea that, open arms, right?
Right.
Hey, we know that you're a train wreck, but we welcome you with open arms, right? Because Jesus does. And that idea means if we welcome in the train wrecks, then we're all train wrecks at some point because we welcomed you in. Right? And so there is this sense of, yeah, we're all sort of a mess and we're all sinners. And because we're all sinners, we're not going to get all up in people's business about their sin. Right? This phrase, right? Love the sinner, hate the sin. I just, when it finally clicked for me why that was annoying the hell out of so many people outside the church, it was like, oh my God, how could I not have seen this? The Bible never tells you to hate someone else's sin.
Right.
Right? He says, love sinners, period. Right? And if you're going to hate sin, hate your own. And that's, again, this idea, oh, God looks at me, he wouldn't change a thing.
On your own life, your own family, your own well-being, your family, your community, your vocations that God has given you so closely before you try to fix the person living, not that you try to fix them, but living 10 stories down. Just share the Christian experience with people as opposed to trying to, fix them.
Yeah, there's I've been doing a series of podcasts with a guy from Open Arms.
Sure.
Great guy. He really enjoys Jordan Peterson. I don't know how much you know about Jordan Peterson, but
Sure.
There was a book, 12 Rules for Life, that he put out, and I think it's Rule 6. It says, set your house in perfect order before you criticize the world.
Oh, I love it.
And
the kids are home. Dana's home. I've got to run.
All right. Yeah, we've been at this a while. We could keep talking, and we should talk again. We'll do that.
Yes.
What is it? Confirmation Sunday and after. We'll do that one next time.
God bless you guys. Check out the book. Check out Pastor Emil's books. Feel free to pick up A Curious Case. It's the perfect stocking stuffer this holiday season.
It is. Great to be with you.
God bless you.
You too. We'll see ya.
Later.